When it comes to themes, I would say identity is integral to this part of the story for quite a few characters, though I at least want to show how some characters have grown since the first game. One such example is Ryoto. His life changed for the better. Then again, it's very hard to top, oh hey, let me be used as a bomb to blow up the good guys. Previously, he was much like Taisen and Ryusei, a fan of the video game Burning PT, which was used as a scouting tool to find capable pilots. Of the three, he seemed the least talented to pilot a mech, yet was still quite good, enough to outclass his future partner Ryo, who previously worked on Hagane as support until she decided the team needed all the help they could get their hands on. I mean, you see a giant robot in the hangar collecting dust, so why not use it? Ryoto, however, wasn't suited to conflict, and he fought under buy-in reluctantly. His commander, who would later appear in Maso Kaishin, knew about this problem and decided to put a bomb in his machine. Once Ryoto was inside after being shot down by the enemy, he could set up the bomb and cripple the Hagane. It may seem unlikely this would happen if Ryoto wasn't shot down, but keep in mind in the first game, flying units were a rarity for the EFA, so getting a lion intact would be a huge bonus. The plan to blow up the ship failed, of course, and Ryoto joined the EFA as a result. While the crew of the Hagane kinda didn't trust him at first, he proved his worth both on and off the battlefield. Especially off it, as his true calling was in mech development. His passion and intellect helped the team on multiple occasions. By the time the second game starts, we already see him alongside his rival/girlfriend, working for her company and helping to develop other mechs. Ryoto seemingly found his calling, and now having something he wants to protect, is able to head back into the war with much more courage than before. The incident sparking such a change was when one of the inspectors, Mechibos, began to invade the facility on the moon. With the mechs having a very hard battle against him, Mechibos forced Ryoto to deploy in a Huckbind still in testing, particularly because it needed the systems using the TK power to be refined, since before, it put too much stress on Ryo, who initially tested it. At first, problems do seem to occur as Ryoto struggles to handle so much power at once, Mechibos eventually gaining the upper hand. All until Ryoto desperately activates another system within his mech, and combines Ryo's mech with his own, the two rivals finally joining to put a huge dent into the Inspector before fleeing. His contribution to the story beyond helping in combat and mech is kinda minimal afterwards, but when it comes to conflict, he is able to seek out what he wants to do alongside Ryo, both finding out who they are. Granted, Ryoto kinda outshines Ryo more often than not through this plotline. There's no trace of the coward he once was, becoming a different person in the process, kinda sorta. At least he ended up better than Shinji Ikari. What's funny is that the game he can be a protagonist in, Evangelion is in that one. I actually wonder if they have special dialogue or something. The next character is Viletta. If you recall from the first game, she was a clone of Ingram who was meant to join the heroes and eventually killing him, along with Juteka and anyone else manipulating everyone. At the end of the game, she was resolved to follow Ingram's instructions to continue training the SRX team, particularly Ryusei since he was still the most green of the bunch despite his intense passion. However, the events of the first game haven't just been swept under the rug. She still betrayed the team initially, and the past eats away at her. Even if Ingram did have good intentions for manipulating the team, fact is, it caused a lot of strife for every member of SRX, even those outside of it. Realizing she can't hold her secret any longer, she reveals to the team who she really is of her own free will. Fortunately for her, they aren't really judgmental assholes and recognize she is her own person and trust her. Yet to her surprise, Ryusei trusts her as well, so much so that when she's about to reveal her secret, he stops her. Thanks to events involving two certain characters I will soon go into, he realizes the past is not what makes a person, but rather the future they intend to create, and Viletta has done nothing else to warrant such distrust. I mean, to be fair, she's killed some politicians. Well, let's face it, I'm sure someone in the team wanted to do that anyway. To him, she is his chief of the SRX team, and nothing less of that, even if she does tend to overtrain him sometimes. Now for Zonvolt, who... honestly, if you ever told me to describe him, I would just point to the massive sword he uses. His identity is really tied to using it, to the point when Wodan and Ymir appears, they think he is Zonvolt. In the previous game, while initially working as the leader of the ATX team, he betrayed them to join the DC, convinced to follow Bayan and Mayor's vision of creating a fighting force capable of fighting off the aliens. He was so devoted to the cause, he pushed his former teammates to their limits, almost to the death until Mayor assigned him the mission of cutting down traitors to the DC, such as Adler. In Ryusei's route, he never seemed too broken up by his role. In Kyosuke's route, however, he is more prone to emotion, actually concerned for the team's safety once Axel was kidnapped by Ingram, and even feeling guilty for the role he played, especially when he thought certain people had actually died. That alone might have been the main reason why he wanted to fight to the death like Mayor and some others did, not wishing to carry the weight of his crimes. Because of this, he would join the team much earlier on that route. There's not really much done with him afterwards beyond working with Elzem, being the honorable badass that can cut through anything, and me going into fanboy mode since this game has much better animations for his sword attacks. Seriously, the sword attack in Game 1 just looked... it looks more like he is backhanding opponents into the air than actually cutting them, though they try their best with the rivalry with Wodan and Ymir. throwing in an identity clash between the two. See, much like Lamia, Wodan is just a cyborg given the personality of the Sanger from his world, who died during the war with the Inspectors. Considering Bigagi nearly killed him in the main timeline, I think it's easy to point out how he died. He was created by Lemon, and to give him a purpose for fighting, he was tasked with protecting Magus, which was some kind of supercomputer. For the most part, this storyline is meant to pit two timelines of Sanger Zonvolt from the history of the entire series. See, while Sanger Zonvolt is known more as a heroic figure, one of his very first appearances was as an antagonist, unless you unlock the right conditions, in which he would turn against the Magus and fight alongside the hero in the final battles. It's kind of a neat meta idea, especially as Wodan is extremely powerful and wants to defeat Sanger, yet only on his terms. For example, in the fight against Bigagi, when Sanger was clearly outgunned, he provides Sanger some aid, fighting off against the Mechagodzilla reject till Sanger's new machine could be sorted. And when the problems arise since the Daigen Guard's functions are limited, Wodan tosses Sanger his sword to fight back, which in turn is one of the reasons Bigagi was driven away. Despite the intense war, there is a sense of honor between the two, Wodan struggling to find his identity similar to Lamia. Yet eventually, after he loses, he is able to reconcile with Sanger, realizing how he isn't protecting Magus by letting some old people use her. Their battle ends with both suddenly appearing to help out the main attack force, both taking on the last of the Machine Children, and good old Daddy Dearest upset kiddos. And it leads to one of my favorite action scenes. Now, the whole shut up and listen thing was used before a few times in both games, yet never to this extent. Now, in defense of this scene, the game has stated how some machines had a way to stop the regeneration, something Sanger himself is able to put a halt to against Wodan. So if you hit the machine with enough force, it can technically break apart, which is proven in the anime too when Arado and Ciola destroy one of the Machine Children. See, it totally makes sense and isn't some asshole I had to try and justify because I'm a major fanboy. Shut up. Anyway, while a nice action-packed rivalry with some good scenes, there is one major problem. Magus herself, or rather, Sophia Nate. Much like the other characters, she was shown off in Game 1, residing in the Earth Cradle to create new technology and help safeguard certain people in the event the worst case scenario happens. Though as I mentioned, the blue-haired douchebag took over to create the Machine Children. Unfortunately, her personality in both games feels flat, and no source of media can save it. She is really not interesting and is mostly unconscious as she is being used in the computer to help create everything against her will, somehow. I know the series has a bit of problem of having the female partner of a character being kidnapped or in trouble so the male character has to step in, but at least those characters have a personality. Plus the impact Sophia has on Sanger, honestly I struggle to remember even after revisiting this series. And I have footage, whereas in Alpha Gaiden she was very much a villain. Sure, circumstances were different, like another personality taking over, but it's better than having her be some passive character. Speaking of Sanger, might as well bring up Elzem. See, both he and Sanger were technically not part of the EFA anymore thanks to their actions in the DC war, where they betrayed them, yet also fought alongside them since they supported Bayon's plan. So unless the world is in trouble, they would likely be marked as enemies or rogue elements. It's certainly one reason why Elzem would need the disguise, yet Sanger does no such thing, so the explanation comes across as silly. Though maybe Sanger did have an idea, then Wodan Ymir stole it and he just got all upset. That actually would have been funny. Hell, when he introduces himself as Ratzel Feinschmaker, Bigagi's translation even comes across as something goofy. However, thanks to Archibald's involvement in the plot, the answer as to why he did this became much clearer. The death of his wife haunted him greatly, as it should since we see a clear flashback, the event tragic in both the game and the anime. Hell, especially in the anime as you can hear him screaming before pulling the trigger. Considering the crimes he and his father committed, turning into Ratzel was meant to be the death of Elzem. Even if the world didn't acknowledge it, he needed to hide behind a mask to function better. During the battle with Archibald, once he gets into the Ash Saber for our final showdown, he even says because of the crimes he committed during the DC war, he doesn't deserve to be the one seeking vengeance for his wife. It's why he begs for his siblings to help him, all while wearing the mask of his reborn persona. The only time he ever discarded his identity was when Daitetsu died, Recognizing Moron the guy in a silly getup would have been very disrespectful. What I also like is how Elzem and Sengar are smarter by distancing themselves by not joining the EFA, so they are not bound by the rules of the newly corrupted organization. Honestly, given how they work with the DC, it's probably for the best. Chances are Judas Traveler would have the two executed on the spot and use only the machine since, hey, extra firepower. Also, since I won't get the chance to bring up Archibald again, I actually like this insane jackass. The game was able to make him sinister thanks to his character portrait at times, and overwhelmingly silly when he goes all out. Kinda wish the anime did more with it since he honestly always looks silly. I would have brought up Rai more since the Tale of Revenge is more about his than Elzem's, but there's not too much change to his character, nor is there an identity issue. At best, much like Mazuki, he has to learn to not blindly fly off the handle, as Archibald was able to take advantage of that and severely damage his machine in their very first encounter. Though at the very least, both he and Rai have a better scene where they reconcile and understand one another better. I pity Leona wasn't more involved though. But now, in order to talk about a certain other character, I have to mention the one person who I felt shouldn't have gotten any sympathy. Lee, the third captain of the EFA, and the traitor to the organization. When the crew first meet this guy, without fail, he acts like a raging jackass who doesn't care about the lives of those who serve under him. Regardless of their accomplishments, they are seen as expendable fodder, meant to die for him and not much else. His pride is often his downfall, even resulting in his own capture. It's kinda why Tetsuya trying to be nice to him is, well, it feels weird. The two know each other from the academy, and that's all we know regarding their relationship, beyond Tetsuya being second fiddle to him. And given how prideful Lee is and how often he has to be saved, it's kinda hard to see why he's considered a tactical mastermind. Whenever I think of him in a fight, I just remember that one jerk from Shrek.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Now, in the defensively, he actually hates how the EFA has become corrupted, like when he was fed false info by another useless character. And he is sometimes capable of listening to good information from his subordinates, like when Kyosuke convinced him a certain base was going to be attacked and have their machines stolen. I can buy that by the time the EFA is taking over in the coup, it's no longer a place he wants to work with. I don't think I need to keep mentioning Kenneth and his backstabbing ways. Then again, he does still make some rather nonsensical decisions. One example was when his team helped Rai, Kai, and Latooni when they were attacked and ambushed by the DC. Since a machine was stolen, he automatically assumes Latooni is a traitor and constantly berates her, and even wants the aggressors off of the team as punishment for their failure, as opposed to, wanting extra firepower considering how powerful the DC are becoming. Decisions like these really make him out to be petty as opposed to being some average military soldier, and only serves to make other characters look good by comparison, like Kai when he talks to and tries to help Latooni, even wanting to take the punishment in her place and trying to listen to her problems and help save her friends. Any chance for redemption or likability dies when he joins the Shadow Mirrors, thinking what he is doing is right, when their goal is mostly just forming chaos just to improve their technology somehow. He chose the side believing in anarchy. Now, to be fair, based on dialogue after meeting the Hagane and the crew, he is extremely upset being unable to fight the aliens since he wants revenge and doesn't believe any of the heroes can succeed. However, he later works with the same aliens, so yeah, he just has a hate boner for the heroes for a problem not even their fault. Remind me why I'm supposed to feel for him? Although really, it just highlights how Lee is better off being a punchable villain, because many characters want to hit this guy, and he deserves every bit of it. It's one thing if he was a by-the-books kind of person, but he isn't and is always eager to get into a fight with Tetsuya even if they are on a mission. It isn't helped when his betrayal ultimately helps to cripple the team. On top of helping Kyosuke get brutalized by Axel, in that same battle, it was Lee who turned on the group and was one of the key reasons for the death of Daitetsu. And this is really difficult to get beyond. When Tetsuya has to deal with the death of Daitetsu, he's understandably hesitant, recognizing Elzem as a better choice given his accomplishments in the DC war to be a captain, though Elzem prefers being in a mech over ship battles. Throughout both games, Tetsuya seemed to put himself down quite a few times, not seeing himself on the same level as Lafina. This in turn led him to be less confident in seeing himself as someone who was capable of doing well, except he has proven he can get the job done. For example, in the last game, he was able to help everyone pierce the White Star to finish off the Balmerians once and for all, and at a point when Daitetsu was ready to give up his own life. And when you factor the way Daitetsu treats Tetsuya, especially since Daitetsu lost his own child, the captain kind of seemed like a father to Tetsuya. Like I said before, he was the team grandpa, able to convince hotheads like Mazuki to join their cause, willing to accept the help of royalty, and even ensure they knew what they were fighting for, and even willing to share a drink with his subordinates, even if he feared losing all the good booze. His death really hurts and is soul-crushing to everyone. Seeing it after all these years, even if Daitetsu wasn't the most well-developed person, it definitely left a mark on me. Easily the saddest death I have seen of an original character in a SRW game. which makes the rise of Tetsuya feel much more powerful. He doesn't even fully accept the rank as captain, claiming it is the soul of Daitetsu still leading the ship, leading everyone to finally take down the Shadow Mirrors, Ainz, and the Inspectors, and all leading up to a final fight I love, for Lee starts to grow desperate and realizes the Shirogane can't take much more punishment. So in a last-ditch effort, he tries to ram the Kurogane. As a reminder, now, I'm going to let Tetsuya say it. This moment is probably my favorite villain kill in the entire game, since it's satisfying to beat Lee with perhaps the best way he could have died. And this game has the potential to continue the development of Tetsuya, especially since he'll have the chance to command the Hagane in the future from now on. Now you might be wondering how they fucked this up. Honestly, Lee should barely be worth ranting about if his story ended here, and if I enjoyed drilling him in the face too much. Well, he somehow survives this encounter. Yeah. It was retcon that Lee was able to escape and appear in a future game so he could eventually get some redemption. Okay, I can't speak for the quality of that particular story, but if I ever see it in English, I doubt it will be good. I already explained why Lee is so insufferable. Hell, I throw Akechi under the bus every chance I get, but at least with his social link, I'm pretty sure someone would have felt something bad for him, even if they previously hated him. I still don't think it's done well, but it was something. Lee doesn't have the tiniest bit of a reason as to why I should feel bad for him beyond a super tiny cutscene about him seeing his family die. No tragic call or anything like that before their deaths either. Just witnessing it in Grimm's betrayal and brief destruction limited by the GBA. The only benefit is the new ride he has is called Air Christmas. Yes, really. It's so stupid, I love it. And what's worse is that Tetsuya's character is dragged through the mud thanks to future games, so getting rid of his defining moment and the revenge is stupid. Really stupid. Princess Shine is another character who has undergone some significant change as well. In the first game, she was unsued to become a pilot, and due to her political status, was often targeted by villains. Her homeland Bricksent was a valuable fighting area for both games, though the first game wanted to tap into her special ability, which basically allowed her to see in the future. And yes, this is a princess and not a queen because... Seriously, if anyone knows the legit rules of the monarchy, let me know. Anyway, Shine had a bit of an attitude problem as well, sometimes her speech showing her immaturity. After being forced to pilot the Valjean and being saved, she did want to fight alongside the heroes, but, well, clearly that was a very dumb idea. Even the children of the school were pumped full of drugs and had to be trained. But it turns out, some good old engineering and a pilot of the school was all Shine needed. In addition to having a mega crush on one of the pilots, Rai, she bonded with Latooni, who she also helped in dressing up in cute dresses to loosen her up in game. Game 2 saw them come together as partners in order to take back Shine's homeland, and all thanks to mechs specifically designed for them to use. The Fair Lions. Although I'm still not sure why the Fair Lions have to do dancing in order to attack enemies. But hey, the mechs are capable of kicking ass, even taking advantage of Shine's future sight and Latooni's piloting skills create a powerful duo. But what does this have to do with identity? Apart from Shine taking the chance to step up her game and help Latooni, it also involves trying to gain the commitment to fight. Even Archibald tries to scare her off with what war is like, but she simply remarks why her machine is red. She is fully ready to shed blood if need be, trying to be the adult she needs to be since only she can rule her country. Latooni's story arc with her friends also has a lot of emphasis on identity too, and we need to get through this in order to talk more about Aya and Mai since Agila is kind of related to their lives. The theme is fairly obvious with the whole mind wiping thing I mentioned earlier, but the residents of the school barely had a past to begin with. They were forged with the pure purpose of being used in war, many not able to recall what they were like when younger. There is no past for them beyond what they experienced in the school. For her friends, the past is in enough to defy any logic and assume Latooni is being forced to pilot against her will. Ironic considering what happens to Siola and Oka later. Once Arado is thought to be dead, Siola constantly has her memories rewritten to not remember him as her partner, but rather as an enemy who stole Latooni. Though Arado is able to occasionally break her mind control, usually by making fun of her large chest, and yes, get used to the boob jokes by the way. That's pretty much standard humor for Endless Frontier.
They're huge.
Anyway, his methods aren't quite enough, though it does motivate him to keep trying. He even tries to become a better pilot with some help from the others, with terrible results. You quickly see why he works better as a partner, as he is often way too reckless even in simulations. When Kai is instructing a class to go over strategies, Shine, who is still new at piloting due to being a princess, was able to give good answers, while Arado just kept giving more reckless answers and was surprised when he was wrong. Even with a long-range unit that he later steals, his strategy is to charge in like a madman and work the strategy from there. Eventually, trying to mold him into something he's clearly not was seen as a horrible idea. Despite the Taisen being extremely hard to control, he was more adjusted to melee combat with the machine, and thus was given the Wild Worker. While it can be fairly mobile and is capable of flight, it's a machine that helps cover his weaknesses, since it has added armor. What I love about the machine in Arado is how he reminds me of a dumber and more reckless version of Kyosuke. Though in this game, his dialogue with Kyosuke is brief, to which the anime is able to fix by at least having one good scene with the two. The machine was also made to help compensate for the weaknesses for Siola's machine, the Wild Falcon, which she stole earlier from Latooni. Basically, think of the robots as the younger siblings of the Taisen and Weissritter, so when they work together, they cover the bases for one another very well. This is proven when Siola is finally free from her control during a battle with the Machine Children, and both she and Arado are able to show their potential with their own team attack. Their identity is ultimately tied to protecting each other, much like how Ryo and Ryoto do, though stretched out since it takes a long time for Siola to regain her senses. And naturally they seem to have a thing for one another, though it's basically an anime trope. You know, Arado playing the idiot goofball, and Siola playing the girl who is angry / hits him constantly despite liking him, that kind of thing. Point is, the two are able to find out what they want and who they are through battle, with the war bringing out the best possible teamwork. And now we can finally talk about Agila, the one who keeps messing with the memories of the school children. Here's the thing, the character does value emotion, though not for anything good, rather because they can help drive a person and help someone surpass their normal limitations. The emotions can help a being achieve things a mere AI is unable to, unless you're the W series, but hey, this version of the world has yet to catch up. It's kind of why she despises the Machine Children, since taking on the abilities will not be enough for what she wants, which is why she continues to dick around with Siola and Oka to drive them into a blood rage, thinking Arado was the one to kidnap Latooni. As we saw, it was a risky venture, but one that could have worked. Although both the game and the anime kind of screw this up, since Oka in the final battle was basically an android, indistinguishable from any of the W series robots. It didn't really make much sense since Agila really loves to torment people. And now enters Mai, who you may remember as Levi, one of the final bosses in the first game. Somehow she survived crashing into Earth, but had amnesia and doesn't remember any time she spent as Levi. Her father tries to make her and Aya go through experiments since the war desperately needs their power, but there's another purpose: drive out the Levi psyche so she doesn't emerge and try to kill the team. Kenzo even tries to force the SRX team to hide her identity, which Viletta is against since she spent so much time hiding her own agenda and feels very guilty about it. Rai and Ryusei also hate this idea very much, thinking this makes Kenzo no better than Agila. Agila then reveals something else when the gang try to rescue Mai once she tries to escape. Both her past and Aya's, they never existed. Literally everything they knew, including them being siblings and Aya losing her mom, it was all fake. In reality, Agila used to work for ICS, where Aya and Mai were experimented on, referred to by number by the Mad Doctor. The memories forged were similar to how Siola and Oka were manipulated, all done so they could obey Agila and Kenzo. However, Kenzo despised her methods and stole the two away during an accident Mai caused. The solution Kenzo had wasn't perfect, since Agila tells Aya the real reason why they always needed to use the T-Link system. If they fail to do so, her personality will break down. Chances are she might either go insane, or perhaps whatever the gang know of Aya could be gone forever. At the very least, it would explain Kenzo's cold attitude and insistence that Aya keeps working on the system beyond aliens knocking at the front door. Aya and Mai do have a mental breakdown with this, though as soon as Agila mentions the bond was a sham, Aya finally speaks up and probably tells the crazy lady to piss off. She even quotes Ingram, who likely knew about this situation. Considering he knew about Ryusei's mother and the experiments, it makes his last words far more effective, and his affection for Aya a bit more genuine than I thought. His words do help resonate with the situation. Don't be caught up in the past. Follow a new path. Because in the end, despite the shocking revelation, what does it change about their lives? Aya and Mai still care about one another like siblings. Kenzo still cares about them. Their allies aren't judging them nor pointing a gun to their heads. And much like with Mai used to being Levi, she's no longer that person and wants to do good. wants to help save the world. You can't change the past, you can only try to forge a new future. Aya, Mai, and especially Viletta realize that most of all in this situation. And it's not like Mai and Viletta plan on forgetting what they did, instead choosing to make up for their crimes and live life their own way. Really, the only thing I find unsatisfying, aside from the love triangle crap between Mai, Latooni, and Ryusei, is the other personality Mai has no longer has any kind of effect on the story ever again. I tried to look up what else happens with the Levy personality, but it seems to be taken out completely after this. Though speaking of the love triangle crap in future games, that too kinda has a theme of identity to it, as Mai tries to conform to Ryusei's likes, while Latooni grows less and less interested in doing so, preferring more to be herself. Eventually, as their arc comes to an end, machine cells show off their true power, making almost any mech invincible. In order to ensure Oka's victory, she's been hooked up to this machine and... Okay, so this is what happens when you're horny on main. I'm starting to see that now. Anyway, Oka has been forcefully bound to the Gaim system, and it takes quite a lot to bring her back to normal. In fact, it takes the caretaker of the kids to do so, Dr. Cuervo, who has been reluctant to help Aguila, though does so to try and protect the children in his own way. A really shitty way considering what happened so far, but hey, he ends up being the one to save Oka, able to bring back her personality with the power of memory cards. It might as well have been one. Though Oka dies in the end, sacrificing herself to end Aguila once and for all, at least she is able to die as herself rather than the number the old hag assigned to her. It's a sad end, though honestly, things got so bad that she admitted there was no way she could live without the use of the machine cells, her body permanently fused to the Gaim system. Sacrificing herself to buy the gang some time to escape and finish off Aguila was the only thing she could do. And even as the gang grieve her loss, they are reminded of one thing. They did kinda save their sister. It was better to have the image of a heroic sacrifice in their heads rather than themselves pulling the trigger. Personally, I feel it's a shame Oka had to die, as there was a unique angle to play with someone bound to a machine for future stories. As for the Shadow Mirrors themselves, their goal is revealed to bring chaos to the world so there can be constant improvements to technology. They believe times of peace breed ignorance, complacency, and overall just slow down progress. He points to the current era of machines and how none of the technology would exist. For example, Bion was only able to create the advanced machine so quickly because he sensed an immense threat coming to Earth, and there were things that helped, like the Tesla drive, while the Earth Federation struggled to make their own units capable of flight. Heck, we could probably use the Huckbein incident as another example. For in the Shadow Mirrors universe, production on the machine stopped thanks to the accident costing so many lives and made them fearful to continue production. The main universe didn't let fear stop them, however, and now the Huckbein is becoming a standard unit over the guest pens. So what does this have to do with their identity? Well, they might just be reflections of the Inspectors. The Inspectors, as stated before, may have had ties to the Balmerians. In fact, the alien group is brought up by them, as the Inspectors themselves are meant to, well, inspect the Earth to see if they are a threat. And considering the large number of weapons produced, not help with stuff like the Granzon, which is able to push back some of their members with the utmost of ease, they resolve to destroy the inhabitants. In fact, their leader, a child named Wendelo, used them as either pets, like using the Shadow Mirrors since they have technology capable of traversing dimensions, or to mature, almost like a child wielding a gun. Which is funny considering Wendelo himself is a child. The name of Wendelo's mech is even referred to as a judge, further showing his superiority when comparing himself to our heroes. Plus, Wendelo says how humans are a disease, breeding war and stating how the machines created by Ibis' team were prime examples. Machines meant to go far into space, yet armed to the teeth. And yes, while Philu and the others just want to explore, they are still technically part of the EFA, and it's technically full of corrupt assholes right now. And beings like the Arrogators have made going into space without a weapon a suicide mission. In fact, the common phrase used of "we don't need a shield, we need a scythe" is made all the more apparent here, since I'm sure Judas Traveler and his entourage would love any excuse to cut down their foes to gain better tech, and so long as an enemy exists, it will be seen as justified. Rather than work with them and try to talk things out, the humans are regarded as barbarians not worth the trouble. Despite the fact that there are pilots who don't want to fight, even Midcrit tried to communicate with them, only to have his words fall on deaf ears. Combined with Wendelo's smugness, it's clear his team doesn't value lives, desensitized from life. Or at least they don't give a single crap about their enemies, since their own army is filled with bioroids, which are some kind of cyborg android thing. I don't even think they're explained. There are technically a few people who care, like Sikalog and Aguisha, who are a couple and do express rage when their partner is killed. Well, Sikalog at least has his portrait changed since he's presumably a mute, though given how Wendelo treats its subordinates, they are likely tools as well. Should they have kept failing, they likely would have been replaced by more bioroids, especially when their emotions get the better of them, like Vigaki. Although what's funny is that the anime added in how Wendello let himself be taken in by the Aints during the finale. Wanting to see the humans gone so much, he was willing to turn into a literal monster for it. The game doesn't do this though, and honestly that's for the best. I actually prefer the original angle since Mechibos is able to at least realize his error when dealing with the Earthlings. Speaking of Mechibos, of all the inspectors, he's the only one convinced of the good of Earthlings, despite also being the one probably the closest to destroying everyone. Hell, he even loves to fight. The stage where I mentioned Lee betraying everyone also involved him using a massive attack to weaken everyone, which did contribute to the loss of Daitetsu. And there have been times where he's been known to play around with the pilots before getting really serious. And maybe it was because of the facial portraits with him always smiling, but he felt the most relaxed and laid back, likely confident in their ability to win. At the same time though, he began to learn the Earthlings are not to be underestimated, proven many times like when Ryoto and Ryo got the better of him. Another incident involves him taking one of the characters hostage, using an ability related to gravity. When Shu comes to help out, Mechibos tries to use his ability on him. Just one problem. Yeah, the funny thing about the Grandson, it's basically the king of gravity. It's like fighting Ifrit from Final Fantasy with fire. Mechibos begins to have doubts given Shu's power, but is willing to engage the heroes one more time to see if they actually hold some value. After all, Shu was a rogue element among the Earthlings and doing his own thing. With his final loss, he is able to acknowledge how the inspectors are weaker mentally as well. Granted, with how many times Biggie goes off into a rant only to get his ass kicked, maybe that was a good indicator. And Wendello, who is also his younger brother by the way, tries to talk him out of even entertaining the notion that Earthlings are more than beasts. All to no avail. In addition to finally letting the gang pass, even being them some info to defeat Wendello, he talks to hoping they can one day sit down and chat. You know, despite holding his girlfriend hostage earlier. When it comes to Mechibos turning good, honestly I felt it could have been done better, like you could have him join some of the DC remnants or find an excuse for him to do so. Doing it so close to the end of the game, it doesn't carry that much of an impact, well, beyond what happens later. Eventually, Mechibos does turn his weapons on Wendello, recognizing that the Earthlings are stronger in more ways than one. Fighting them and being defeated, seeing how they treat each other reminded him of how they were losing their emotions. Granted, the inspectors demonstrate they do have emotions, but I'm assuming he refers to how they have become nothing but destroyers. Everyone in the group is just looking for a reason to fight and hurt others. For as much as Wendello kept claiming how the Earthlings were barbarians, well, look in the mirror. And Mechibos is tired of it. Unfortunately, Wendello foresaw this betrayal and is able to deal with Mechibos with little issue. It's even possible for Mechibos to not get a hit in on his brother if you damage Wendello fast enough. Naturally, Wendello doesn't care and just proves Mechibos was right all this time. His death, though, would surprisingly not stick, though that's a mess for future games. Still, I feel it ties into the theme identity for Mechibos, trying to rediscover his own emotions and realize he's not like the inspectors at all. The downside is, much like Oka, it was too late for him. So how do the Shadow Mirrors relate to the Inspectors? Well, quite frankly, the Inspectors seem like a natural progression for where the Shadow Mirrors would end up. Creating conflict helps give them a purpose, but there needs to be more to the idea. So the characters ended up trying to find a way to keep the fight going, something to attach themselves to a conflict. In this game's case, it was to find Gilliam Yeager, whose real name is Helios Olympus and did work for him, until he decided the Shadow Mirrors were really wrong after coming to the original generation timeline. What's funny is that based on dialogue with Axel in the final battle, Gilliam will admit the Shadow Universe wasn't even the original world he stemmed from. In fact, based on info I found out, he's the only character in the OG series to travel through other Super Robot War games. One day I'll try and cover the original game he came from, since I discovered it while writing these spoilers. Anyway, back on track. The Shadow Mirrors plan on going back after their failed attempt on the regular Earth and then getting Gilliam, since he was necessary to complete System XN, which can only work since it's configured for him specifically. This is proven when the Shadow Mirrors tried to jump of their own and lost about 75% of their main fighting force, and I'm sure they will never be seen again. Spoilers, they are seen again in a certain other game. However, the new main goal was to conquer their own universe, and then come right back to the main one once they were better equipped since they lost a lot of forces. Honestly, besides revenge, they have no reason to do so, or to go to any other world. They claim they want to improve technology, but it's clearly the only excuse they have, since whatever new tech is gained is only used for war. Even Lamia, who is able to develop her own free will, and despite given the chance to leave, is hunted down by the Shadow Mirrors anyway. Much like the Inspectors, war has become their identity. What Mechibos said about his own people, of how their emotions were dying, is seen far too much within the shadow mirrors. Vindel can claim his so-called good goals all he wants, and Lemon can feel so proud of her machines gaining sentience, but none of it changes how the shadow mirrors were exactly the kind of people the inspectors wanted to get rid of, and ultimately, their only identity could be found within war. This could also work from a more meta perspective. Looking at the gameplay, the only way to keep growing stronger is to constantly fight enemies. There is no way to go to a side stage and grind enemies like there is in Fire Emblem games right now. If you want to successfully grind, you're going to have to intentionally fail a mission again and again, halting progress for the sake of power, and depending on how much power you want, the end goal will take much longer. The shadow mirrors can be seen like that in a sense. People want power, yet constantly stuck in a loop with no real progress to the future. At least with the game, there is an end goal. You will eventually max out all the mechs and weapons. Not so much for an organization like this. At best, they get rid of the current enemies, but with their overall plan, they will just want more people to fight anyway, which ultimately leads to what I just explained. And given how their fighting force is basically made up of cyborgs, well, Vindel Mausier is not some big boss or anything. Axel and Alfimi are also guilty of this. Axel is extremely obsessed with killing Kyosuke, to the point where he's willing to defy orders sometimes just to get his chance to take on the man he assumes must be the same as the Beowulf in his world. We see this as early as the beginning, where he stays behind to settle his score with him, and during one particular fight, he rips apart the Taisen and seems to delight in ripping him to literal shreds. In the anime, it's the trauma Beowulf instilled into him that makes him want to take Kyosuke down, ripping the limbs of the Taisen off, only to soon realize the parts aren't growing back, hammering in that this isn't the same Kyosuke he knows of. In the game, his sole identifier, i.e. his revenge, is what causes his downfall. During another battle, he almost lost to Kyosuke and his friends, nearly dying until an android named Echidna stepped in. The reason he hates androids is never really given, as he's unable to trust them, yet that may just paint a picture as to why he's fighting in the first place. If the EFA is corrupted, and an evil Kyosuke is at the helm without the influence of the Ainz, he might just hate people who just say yes, people who have no will of their own, no fire to fight back for what they believe in. I'm guessing this is the case since he apparently does begin to respect the W-Series cyborgs after Lamia's betrayal, impressed by her skill as they face each other off in the PS2 version. Granted, what I say is mostly just a theory, especially given what he says just before Lamia begins her own betrayal after being repaired. But he does grow upset when Echidna seemed to defy orders by sacrificing her own life to save Axel, and this was in spite of Lemon telling Echidna this wasn't allowed. Much like Lamia, she seemingly formed her own free will, yet still remained shackled to Lemon's orders because she believed her identity was set in stone. Obey your master and make her happy. Her last words even reflecting this. It's really telling how those who assume their identity lies only in war, or being a puppet, will always end the same, with death. Even Axel seemed to prefer to die despite being a tool for Vindel, rather than ever be like Lamia, at least in the original. It really only hammers in how much this version of Axel needs to change if he was going to be brought back, since it's only when he lets go of his vengeance, only when he's free of Vindel's words, is he able to do much good in the world, to find his new identity as a defender of Earth. Or at the very least in the anime, he knows which Kyosuke to punch in the face. Granted, it also doesn't end well for him at all. Meanwhile, with Alfimi, her identity at first is about being obsessed with Kyosuke, though in another way. Despite being an Ainz, she came from Excellent. See, there was a shuttle crash with only two survivors, Excellent and Kyosuke. This was referenced in the first game, with Kyosuke himself barely remembering anything, but he did try to protect Excellent, and Excellent's feelings for him likely formed in that brief moment. Or maybe she eyed him from afar, who knows. To ensure the two survived, since Excellent at that point actually did die, she needed to be converted a bit into an Ainz. It's why she's able to be mind controlled by them. They said they couldn't do the same to Kyosuke because he avoided this fate, but maybe he was affected a bit. It's been noted in the series he can recover quicker than the average person and survive incidents other people would die in. This is possibly connected to the anime where the Kyosuke in that world was fully converted into an Ainz. Or maybe this has something to do with Endless Frontier that I'm simply missing, who knows. So how does Alfimi fit into this? Well, she's a clone. An Ainz based off of Excellent's mind, which is why she is obsessed over Kyosuke, wanting his affection. But wait, what happened to Excellent in the Shadow Mirror universe then? Actually, that's Lemon. Her body and personality radically changed since her death thanks to her own parents.
He's Squidward, you're Squidward, I'm Squidward! Are there any other Squidwards I should know about?
The Ainz did this to try and understand humanity and restart the universe because if the right things are going, everything is supposedly going to be destroyed. The humans of Earth, however, aren't the only ones targeted. One of the characters comments on how Alfimi means the inspectors as well, causing some disbelief that he doesn't believe in aliens despite all the bullcrap happening, but he does bring up a great point. Every alien so far has an uncanny resemblance to humanity, and admittedly trying to understand the logic behind the Ain's actions beyond the fact that humans and aliens have been hungry for war, creating chaos, is difficult. As I said in the last part, their dialogue can be hard to follow, even as characters are able to pick it apart. Sometimes I feel like I'm listening to Albedo again, which makes me think of a certain someone.
Family that I live for only breathes the air that smells of combat. With or without the faceplate, I am the ultimate warrior.
Their logic is proven to be flawed for one simple reason. They try to judge and recreate all of humanity based on a single person. Using Axel as an example was already one of the worst ideas imaginable, and I don't think anyone needs to go into the specifics. Also weird is how Alfimi is proficient with a sword considering how much Axel likes to shoot things from afar. But there are a few points to this idea not really working out. There's the hypocrisy angle since, well, they say humans are the cause of the universe's destruction, so they use a human to try and create their own preferred race. More importantly, however, it takes more than one single person to act as a stand-in for all of humanity. People have their own biases, their thoughts and desires. Not everyone is going to be the same, as there will be differences between them, even if they are small. And the inspectors made this mistake, choosing to view only the people creating the weapons and piloting giant robots as just barbarians, when in reality, some people just wanted to go into space and explore, and others just wanted not to fight at all, yet are forced to because some spoiled brat decided to destroy all life on the planet, and currently now by some being who hates impurities, which now includes Alfimi since she is considered a failure. Actually wait, with how this big Ain't claims how there are impurities and keeps claiming itself as a chosen one, is the giant Ain't supposed to be a Nazi or something? At any rate, much like the other factions before now, the Aints fail to grasp simple logic, leading to its downfall. There's no attempt at understanding their foe, no desire for peace since in theory, it should be easier to dominate someone rather than convince them your ideas are right, or rather, no desire to change yourselves. It's why Lamia is still around while Echidna is space dust. It's why Viletta is respected within the SRX team, and it's why Daitetsu was such a respected commander, while Lee deserves none of it. Should you get the battle masteries, Alfimi will actually turn on the Big Ainst, and it will unlock her as a playable character and an extra stage where she states how she wants to find out who she is now. The feelings she has for Kyosuke are confusing her, and she wants to be able to find her own identity over just being a tool. Unfortunately, since the game demands a sad ending, Alfimi ends up dying just as she discovers her happiness, her existence dependent on the Big Ainst. She dies thinking she wasn't able to find herself, though Kyosuke reassures Axel and she gained free will at the end, similar to how Oka bit the dust. It made me wish there were better scenes beyond her just being vague as all hell, since her plotline doesn't have too much meat to it, and yet, it's better than the anime where she just sacrifices herself for Kyosuke with all of this stuff barely touched on. In fact, the anime's finale is honestly the weakest part of it. Everything feels rushed in that thing. Her life wouldn't end here though, for much like Axel, she too would be brought back. In fact, their souls will be bonded together to ensure their survival, and they are even playable in the sequel to Endless Frontier. But that is a tale for another day. And finally, let's talk about Lamia, though there isn't a whole lot to say. As the game goes on, her feelings develop and she finds herself doing things she doesn't expect, like defending some people for their actions, such as when Arado was suspected of being a spy, and she pointed out some examples as to why that wouldn't be the case. For as much as she was just trying to act and blend in with the crew, there were genuine attempts to try and save them, and an ever-growing uneasiness as the game continues. She didn't even want to tell anyone regarding Excellen's identity, fearing it since Lemon shared her last name. By the time she betrays the group during Vindel's arrival, Lamia reveals her gambit, self-destruct right in front of Vindel and Lemon's face, moved by the compassion of her comrades who view her as more than just a weapon. I should know, given her nature, dying was already something she came to terms with, to do anything to accomplish the mission. In fact, that seemed to be a standard function of the W-series cyborgs. For instance, when they try to capture some of the robots, they notice that the cockpits were completely empty, and Lamia notes that was part of the self-destruct thing. By the time she threatens the Hagane and turns on her masters, there's no real hesitance in throwing her life away. Though as other events happen, like helping Gilliam throw Vindel across universes, or even her attempted suicide because she's unable to accept the grief of killing what was essentially her mother, it's very clear there's a strong desire to atone. Perhaps even self-loathing attitude since she could only see herself as a weapon. This thought process can be seen as soon as the moment she sacrifices herself and when talking to Lemon afterwards. Sure, she has a desire to live and take down the Shadow Mirrors, but only as part of her responsibility for how wrong they are, and how she was created by them. Yet whenever it comes to Lemon, even if she doesn't hesitate in pulling the trigger, her mood is far sadder when confronting her creator. Not helped when Lemon clearly wants Lamia to follow her own will, even if their paths are so different to warrant death. So the sadness is a bit more justified, especially for one still trying to discover their emotions and who exactly they are. Fortunately, the gang are able to talk her down, though Viletta seems to hit the nail on the head more than anyone. countering Lamia's "I'm not human" line by replying technically she isn't either, just a clone of someone else, and given how there's a temporary peace, she would definitely have plenty of time to discover her own identity. Her future, well, the good news is, well, she's indeed still alive. The bad news, well, let's just say her life will go to hell in the next game. However, as I tried to dissect her, I began to notice how a lot of the story arcs in the game reflected her. Wodan Ymir was all about purpose, both androids possessing it and ultimately changing their minds about their targets to the point where they respected their foes and aided them. In fact, both cyborgs went beyond the normal programming they possessed, surprising their creators with their own desires. You could even make the same argument for Echidna and how she sacrificed herself to save Axel, as both she and Lamia wanted to please Lemon, yet only Echidna chose to follow the path of being a puppet for the sake of Lemon, for her mother was all she knew of. Regarding Alfimi, it's about individuality, of wondering if they could escape their nature and discover their own emotions, of who they really are, even welcomed by the team. Axel challenged her on free will, to the point where she felt he was a puppet as well, given how he fought without much of a cause. Oka sacrificing herself is kinda similar to how Lamia keeps throwing herself into dangerous situations, believing she can't exist given what she is. And what's funny is how she isn't even involved in a few of these plotlines. Not sure if that was done on purpose, but it does help in trying to think about her personality more. And that's everything in Original Generations 2 regarding the theme of identity, or at least everything I was willing to talk about. I might revisit this if the remakes are translated and playable, since like I said before, they are the definitive version of these two games. Hell, there are characters introduced in the remake that are simply absent in this game. Plus, Gilliam requires me to look at Hero Senki, Project Olympus, which I now need to find. I just hope looking at these two games was enough to help get you interested in the series, that and Masokeishin. Despite some issues though, like with the ball-busting gameplay that makes me want to break my TV, I love this game and think it's the best of the Original Generation games. Fantastic robots paired with awesome characters, and I can't get enough of it, even with some plot lines that kinda fell flat for me. You'll notice that I didn't really bring up Ibis's plotline or anything, and that's because, well, it's not all that interesting. And Slay just feels like a spoiled brat. I just wish Moondwellers wasn't so hard to grasp given all the other games we missed out on. Fortunately, the info I did go over should make it much easier to get into Endless Frontier. I mean, technically not knowing everything could lead to some fun surprises, but now you can be like Steve Rogers and say,
I do. I understood that reference.
As for the other games after this, there are quite a few. Apart from the remakes I mentioned, there is Original Generation Gaiden, which would deal with Shu being the main threat. After that, second Super Robot Wars Original Generation, yes, that's the official title. Plus, there are two other Masokeishin titles that, while I know a tiny bit about, I can't really say much. There is also the spin-off Endless Frontier, like I mentioned, which you can technically get, and the sequel, Exceed, which has gotten a translation since last year. All of those games would then lead into Moondwellers, so as you can imagine, there is a ton of info. Technically, there is a translated script for second Super Robot Wars Original Generation, but unlike with Pied Piper, it's insanely long, and the chances of me making a video are slim, especially when there are still more games I gotta look at to fully understand the plot, and I thought Xenosaga was hard to keep up with. But yeah, when it comes to this game, it was exhausting to try and dissect. There are still plot lines and characters I haven't even brought up, like former DC pilots Yuki and Carla, or talking about how much of a badass Irm's girlfriend Ring was, both on and off the battlefield. That's not even getting into every little stupid thing happening within this game for the sake of comedy. And Lord knows there is probably the issue of sexism regarding certain characters, along with a whole mess of other problems. I even think this review series of the SRW titles has been a mess to deal with thanks to all the continuity, the abundance of plot, and the way I tackled all of it. However, Super Robot Wars is fun to me. I already said how much I had fun with each game I played. They can be stupid, they can be funny, they can even pull up dramatic scenes well. Granted, they can also screw them up too, but at the end of the day, no matter what I say in these videos, I just find the series fun and love every minute of it. Shin Megami Tensei may get me thinking about each title regarding the characters and themes presented. Super Robot Wars though makes me feel like a kid again, shouting at my screen as I see my favorite characters kick 10 kinds of ass. And sure, making these videos was stressful, particularly in June as my depression got the better of me, yet regardless of what happens, I'm glad I talked about Super Robot Wars, and I don't regret a damn thing. Next time, well, I'm taking a break. Thanks to the current situation with COVID-19 and the whole world in shambles thanks to a certain orange jackass, I need a breather for a sake of my mental health. Unfortunately, I don't know when I'll be back, but I will definitely return. With what though, who knows. Thank you for joining me for 6 years, and thank you Super Robot Wars for providing entertainment for 30 years now. I'm the smartest moron, and here's to hopefully enjoying another 30 years of Super Robot Wars.